shoes. Greetings, distinguished followers, Chosen Chimp here, introducing a brand new feature where I break down an entire series of classic Doctor Who and ask that all-important question, which one was the best? Or at least, which one was my favourite? Subjective, I know. I'm just using it as an excuse to talk about Doctor Who. I figured that Series 7 would be a good place to start because not only is it the earliest season to be preserved in its entirety, but it's also the first series in colour. It was the first in a lot of ways. Patrick Troughton's tenure as the second Doctor ended in 1969's The War Games, which was not only the final episode of Doctor Who to be shown in the 60s, but also closed the book on the Doctor's adventures through time and space, which began 6 years ago in An Unearthly Child. And as far as I'm concerned, it did so in superbly neat fashion. But now it's the 1970s, and it's this guy. New titles, new everything, almost. The War Games was produced by Derek Sherwin, and so was the first ever episode of the Pertwee era, so hello slick continuity. But after that, it was Barry Letts all the way, the one and only producer / showrunner for the entirety of the Pertwee era, bar that first story. It was an era that successfully redefined the entire identity and lore of Doctor Who, not a single bloody Cyberman. But as far as Season 7 was concerned, I like to think of it as an experiment to see what stuck. Because of these meddling Time Lords here, Season 7 saw the start of an era that focused on Earth-based stories more assiduously than ever before. The Time Lords castrate the Doctor's ability to time travel, effectively stranding him on Earth and forcing him to adapt to native Earth life, which he does a commendable if not begrudging job of. This of course means that all the big bads of the universe come to us. Isn't that nice? In this season, the Doctor does one thing with his spare time away from his new job role as Unit Scientific Advisor, and that is try and fix his TARDIS to escape, which is a consistent mission failed from A to B. And it will stay that way for a very long time to come. But it's not all bad. He makes a new friend in the form of Liz Shaw and hooks up with some old acquaintances too. Elizabeth Shaw in particular was a cool addition to the roster. The previous couple of female companions in Doctor Who, with no disrespect intended towards Victoria and Zoe, were, well, very squeaky. The third Doctor's first assistant, however, was much more straight-laced, serious, and even sceptical over the very idea of extraterrestrials, at first. But ultimately, Liz was brave, helpful, and dead clever. It's a shame we didn't get more of Liz, who left just after one series. She married a master, as in the actor. Season 7 also saw the debut of Bessie, but Bessie wasn't a companion. Bessie was a car. And so begins a thematic run of homegrown threats spliced with alien danger, where scientific philosophy clashes with military might. Mixed in with a big broth of political food for thought, big explosions and stuntmen going off their heads. Some of the stunts in this series are wild. They're lucky to be alive. Series 7 only had 4 serials, but 3 of those serials are 7 episodes a pop, so I wouldn't exactly call it a swift watch. I think all of these stories are wonderful, and I'm only going to get so far in ranking these, really, because I'm trying to splice objective criticism with my own subjective feelings. Please feel free to fully disagree with my list. By all means, get in the comment section and tell me how you would rank these. Let's get into this. Number 4, Spearhead from Space. Season 7 quickly establishes itself as a different breed of cat by planting its flag in the everyday world and attempting to expose and analyse some of the greed and corruption in that world. To me, Series 7 is all about brains, heart, love, loss, tragedy. You know how in the War Games the Doctor doesn't really succeed, he kind of loses in the end? Well, there's plenty more where that came from. And Spearhead from Space is the one adventure in Season 7 that doesn't quite encapsulate this. Instead, mannequins with guns for hands outside of Tesco. I've talked a lot about this scene and how it's scary, but this time I'm covering Spearhead from Space in its entirety, the entire serial. And the only reason why I'm ranking it number 4 is because the other 3 serials in Series 7, well, we'll get to those. Spearhead from Space begins with a lovely shot of Earth. A fresh-faced Doctor hitting Mother Earth with a bang and observing his new appearance in this, planet Earth's smallest mirror. Spearhead from Space is a great establishment for a new era of Doctor Who. Pertwee is stellar from the word go. He's got that little bit of Troughton in his mannerisms, but no, this guy's different, and it's a blast getting to know him, and we will continue to get to know him. Like I said, I'm mainly taking away points because the peril itself, in essence, isn't really up to much, and I'm not dissing the Nestines per se, but it's just another Conquer Earth story, and that's it. These ones are using plastic to get the job done, and this is where it comes into its own, and this is where the big plus is, because the Autons are scary as hell. For my money, the scariest thing in Doctor Who so far. They're very well packaged, even the ones who are trying to pass as humans in all their shiny, slightly green glory, surreptitiously infiltrating the resident doll factory in order to carry out their wicked shiny ways. With the Autons, it was really about the aesthetics, about how weird and scary they look, and this particular model is my favourite, those eyes. And that guy walking through the woods. And there is none more wicked than the chief voice box for the Nestine consciousness, Channing. But the thing you need to know about Channing in this story, he really likes a good stare. According to Channing, he's been conquering planets in this fashion for 1,000 million years. Wow. But the Doctor takes the fight to them and jobs a good un. I can swear he's almost eating the tentacles in that shot. Gunfights galore, death, actual blood, and Unit shooting the Doctor, who's the main character in Doctor Who, in the head. They can't even make up their minds over how to respond. At the end of the episode, one of them says, "Who told you to fire?" And in the beginning of the episode, in the same shot, he says, "Stop firing." Yeah, we're going to get to Unit later. But credit to Unit, they do have a firefight that's very much in keeping with the firefights that the Brigadier managed in the Web of Fear and the Invasion, but now it's in colour, so that's cool. What happened to Monroe? That guy, I have no idea. Is Spearhead from Space worthy of being the first ever colour episode of Doctor Who? Yes, it is, and I love it. But as far as Series 7 was concerned, the best was yet to come. Number 3, Inferno. Inferno was the 4th and final story of Series 7, and this is where placing these stories in order of quality already gets really tough. Inferno is so good, and it is so close to my heart. The concept of a parallel universe and how it is executed is a star. Here's where I'm taking away points. The Primords, these guys. Great concept, love how they sound, but they're just hairy men who stare into the camera too much. Stop looking at the audience. You're not wishing people a happy Christmas in 1965. If you want to know how to stare properly, ask Channing how it's done. I'm just not fully sold on the wereman concept, and I suppose that all creatures had a ropey element to them during this era of Doctor Who, even the good quality ones, but it just seems like a bit of a silly component in an otherwise brilliant Doctor Who story, and it is brilliant. And here is what I consider to be the true villain of the piece, Brigade Leader. What a character. He's the what-if police state counterpart to the Brigadier, who never had a good Doctor in his life. A couple of years back, I read a book published by Candy Jar called I, Alistair, written by Robert Mamone, which goes into the detail of Brigade Leader's history and what this parallel Earth was like before Pertwee's Doctor rocked up, and it's a really, really good book, and I'm just really emotionally invested in this rather obscure pocket of the Doctor Who universe. For an entire chunk of Inferno, the Primords sit in the backdrop, and this is where the story really comes into its own. Based loosely on the real-life moe-hole drilling expedition of the 1960s, which sought to drill directly into the Earth's crust, Inferno sees the Doctor unsubtly gate-crash Stahlman's drilling project. Professor Stahlman is a tit. Professor Stahlman is trying to tap an energy source of unlimited power. Cue the green ooze, cue the infected personnel, who thrive off the heat and try to make things even hotter by turning the planet Earth into one big ocean of lava, and they've got all the controls to do that at this drilling site. And all this scientific nitwit does is name the gas after himself. Stahlman's gas, that's his name for it. He also calls the project Penetration Zero. More interesting is how the Doctor is secretly using the facilities to get his control console working, having chaperoned the thing to various sites across this series. During this particular bout of his defiant "no, I won't do as I'm told"ness, the Doctor is transported into this far less fun and seemingly more scientifically advanced version of Earth. But it's only more scientifically advanced in the sense that it's closer to tapping into the Earth's crust and turning the entire planet into a tsunami of lava. The Doctor spends most of his time here being tortured via the bullish tactics of the Republican security forces, and his advice to stop the drill is largely ignored because he's mistaken for some kind of conspirator. And here we go, here comes the apocalypse, accompanied with this orange "the world is ending" filter where everything shakes and goes blurry and you just really feel like the world is ending. It's a very grim concept and a great way to bring some extra oomph to this story. The world ending in a matter of minutes brings out the best and worst of people in their last stand, showing that you can either do the right thing and fight for the greater good, or become a self-serving coward, which is what the brigade leader does. You see, he never had a doctor in his life, or a moustache. Production-wise, a great deal goes into putting across the end of the world, and it's really effective. And this traumatic incident really leaves an impression on the Doctor. He actually recaps this incident one series later in The Mind of Evil. Inferno is one of a couple of examples in this series where the Doctor is only partially successful in his outcome. By the end of the story, he has 2 planets to save, and he only manages to save 1. Inferno is a fantastic action story where the characters take centre stage. There is very little to dislike in this one, however it did come after 2 back-to-back serials, which for my money truly embodied the cerebral heart and soul of Series 7. Number 2, the Silurians. It's a very close second, alright? I mean, where would Doctor Who be without the Silurians, am I right? There is good reason why this is still regarded as one of the all-time classics. I mean, the complication that these creatures bring about to the good versus evil dynamic. It's unprecedented. I mean, there has been a sort of dissension within the ranks element to villainous creatures seen before in Doctor Who as far back as the Centaurites, but not like this. The Silurians is a groundbreaker. Firstly, these guys, not aliens. They are homegrown indigenous Earthlings who went into hibernation before Homo sapiens took control. Or at least that was the case until this nuclear research facility showed up. And then you get the drilling and the waking up and then the business-geared fuddy-duddiness of it all. At the heart of this story are 2 sides that just cannot come to an agreement, and it's broken down into some more little nuanced, interesting subplots as well. You get this whole section in the first chapter of the episode involving a manhunt for one Silurian that's gone renegade, and straight away the Doctor gets the sense that this is a creature that's on the defence and not on the attack. Towards the second part, you get a whole pandemic story. There's a release of this disease, and it's infecting all of these people, and this, my friends, is where the Brigadier really comes into his own. You see, what he does when the Doctor is driving towards a hospital and he drives through the gate. Watch this bit closely. The Brigadier, he just points to the place that the Doctor is clearly heading towards anyway. It's a marvellous bit of military cleverness. Oh, I am so going to get to unit in a minute. But seriously, the negotiation scene of this story is really touching. One of the Silurians asks the Doctor if his people would agree to a peace settlement, and the Doctor can only say, "They're not my people." I mean, I guess this kind of means that he can't vouch for their actions, he can only offer advice. And because there's warmongering pillocks on both sides of the argument, the negotiations are destined to fall. But that doesn't mean the Doctor isn't going to try, and try he does. Speaking of the Silurians, the aesthetic appearance of them is pretty slick, and I know that people might question the integrity of this 50-year-old interpretation of them where their heads are all wobbly and everything, but they do have that glowing third eye, which makes them a cut above the rest as far as I'm concerned. Great stuff. It's more about the political complications that these creatures represent, and that ending, oof. The Silurians is also the first instance where the third Doctor gets to play peacemaker, that is when he's not walking around like the big hunk of Time Lord beef that he is. Though being marvellously chopsy to people in Spearhead from space, this is a story where number 3 is truly established as the one to stick it to the man. Why? Because he wants peace, because he doesn't want either side to be a casualty of war, because he sees the goodness and the flaws in both parties. He just wants them to get along. And guess what? He loses. The Brigadier blows up the Silurian base just as the Homo reptilicus occupying it go into hibernation. The Doctor's face in that final shot is of utter defeat. There are many superb elements to Doctor Who and the Silurians. It is such a brilliant story, a vital and distinct component in classic Doctor Who history. But I just think this next story did everything a little bit better. And number 1, the Ambassadors of Death. There is just something very special and very unique to the Ambassadors of Death. You might think this is a strange choice for number 1. I even questioned it myself, but having watched it a couple of times in a row, it's just brilliant. The aliens are credible, the story is smart, the music is brilliant. It's a concept that doesn't get revisited in any shape or form as far as I'm aware. Straight away, this one has got a bit of a different feel. Like I said, Series 7, I think, was a time for them to experiment and throw things at the wall to see what stuck. So everything about this is kind of not quite what you'd see in later, more established Pertwee episodes. I like the way that you get a little intro at the beginning before the title sequence explodes onto the screen. That didn't happen pretty much ever in classic Doctor Who, I think, and it's great. And then you get the fictional TV presenter effectively narrating the opening story of this episode straight at you, the viewer, because this is Series 7, and if Channing can stare and Primords can stare, then that guy's allowed to stare too. He's got a legitimate reason because he's actually looking at a camera. He's kind of like me, talking about this episode. It's weird, but it's cool. And it's all because of these astronauts. Mars Probe 7, Recovery 7. Ambassadors of Death is a rescue mission turned conspiracy story, and it does a lot with very little. It starts with the Doctor dilly-dallying about with his control console to pull a limited amount of timey-wimey mischief on his companion. We see a bit more of that in seasons to come. And it also sees the Doctor having a little snipe at the fact that the brig blew up the Silurians in the previous episodes. You get the disappearance of this astronaut, an awful repetitive sound. So begins a thriller story with more than its share of twists, as shady local factions jockey for control of forces they couldn't truly grasp, even if they were fans of the popular television show Doctor Who. All of these events are seemingly disconnected at the beginning, so we get the pleasure of watching the dots slowly join throughout the 7 episodes. The homegrown Earth-based human industrial clunk scene in Inferno and the Silurians is ramped up to 11 in Ambassadors, and our frilly dandy hero taking the bull by the horns at every opportunity. We all know that Jon Pertwee was a show stealer of a Doctor, but I see the Ambassadors of Death as one of the ultimate case studies. The conjuring trick I'm going to draw the line on, I'm afraid. It's pretty much the only thing in this story I don't like. He uses what he calls a transmigration technique on an object. You never see him do it anywhere else to my knowledge, and it's wasted on a tape. I'm going to forget that scene's in there. But he's amazing in every other respect, and there's also a bit of a early William Hartnell coldness to him. There's one scene where they kidnap Liz and the kidnappers call up the Doctor and says that they will kill her if he doesn't stop meddling, and he immediately says to the scientist, well, let's get back to work, shall we? Very Capaldi at the beginning of Capaldi's run. Other things worthy of note: Bessie's anti-thief glue thing and this van that can transform. I like that. And also that docking sequence with that music over the top of it. It's very evocative. But things get really saucy when the rescue mission to bring home the 3 astronauts instead invites these mysterious fellas, who are intercepted by a group of military crooks working for an unknown benefactor. Literally nobody can be trusted. Scientists, soldiers, politicians, they're all operating under this subversive chain of command and bumping each other off occasionally in all manner of imaginative ways. Look at this bleak burying the bodies in a gravel pit in Hertfordshire scene, all because they spent a bit of time in a van with 3 nuclear spacemen. And this guy gets given a big radioactive isotope for his dinner. Ah, hello John Viner from Tomb of the Cybermen. Hard luck, mate. Of course these aren't the real astronauts, they're still in space. The Doctor goes up to space and meets them in person, and they're fine, they just haven't got a clue. They think they're on Earth watching football on the telly, but they're just looking at this blank screen with a red light, and then they scoff at the Doctor for suggesting anything different. Hypnosis 101. Go back to your invisible footy, guys. As for these guys in the suits, firstly, that guy, he takes one hell of a bump down those stairs, man. I honestly don't know how that stuntman was okay after that. He lands backwards on his head. It's insane. Watch it. It's insane. They're aliens, the only legit creatures from space in this season besides the Autons and the Nestines. They love a bit of radiation, and these thugs for hires are keeping them like lab rats and using them to carry out attacks on specific targets. Fort Knox and the likes, bank robbing, all kinds of petty stuff. Pathetic. But it doesn't actually end there. The brains behind the operation are Mr. George Carrington. He's a lot more measured in his tactics. He first encountered these radioactive creatures whilst on a space mission, which resulted in the accidental death of his colleague. Carrington's now got it in his head that these are the bad guys. He has invited these 3 ambassadors and then controlled them into doing criminal acts to make them look like the bad guys. His ultimate goal is to drum up support from across the planet so they can then launch an offensive on these creatures in space. He sees himself as doing the right thing. He's trying to protect planet Earth, and while it's misguided, it's possibly the most interesting, complex and clever examples of human villainy that we've seen in Doctor Who up until this point, basically ever. Really interesting stuff. This shot of one of the aliens walking zombie-like to storm the base with the sunlight causing a silhouette behind him is brilliant. And this is where the story gets amazing. Look at those red zapping things. Unit didn't stand a chance. At this juncture in the story, we also see the return of Sergeant Benton. Yay! Not seen since his monochromic corporal days in the Invasion. We get more of the Ambassador's measured menace in the final episode, but also a roundabout finale involving the news reporter where the creature will be revealed to the world on live TV. Carrington is using the news network to drum up support for his cause, a cause against one of the few alien beings that actually don't have an interest in conquering the Earth. I can't stress this enough, folks, the ambassadors are not the baddies. Whilst in space, the Doctor visits their ship and has a conversation with one of them, and though appearance-wise it might seem a little bit its beauty is in its subtlety. I expect at one point this entire story will get a special FX makeover like they did with Terror of the Autons and to a lesser extent Day of the Daleks, but I really like this. When the Doctor does finally manage to communicate with the ambassadors on Earth, they immediately protest that they've been made to kill and that they came in peace. Peace. Carrington's got it all backwards. Their people at HQ have no problem with destroying the Earth if they don't have their ambassadors returned safely. Carrington is causing the thing that he's trying to prevent. And I'll tell you, it's a flipping good job that we got the Doctor on hand for this one, appealing to the better nature of the ambassadors to help avert catastrophe. The Doctor also pleads for nobody to be harmed, and that includes soldiers. The closing moments is a pretty neat dismount. The Doctor even shows a nugget of empathy for Carrington's cause. Carrington was bound by duty and doing the right thing, and whilst the Doctor saw him for a bit of a pillock, he also understood that he was trying to do the right thing, and showed a little bit of sympathy for that. Then he just walks off and says goodbye. I think he's still annoyed at the Brigadier for the Silurians thing. The point is, not many people die in this episode, except for the crooks, of course, which, you know, they had it coming, and some unfortunate unit soldiers. You got T-Man, Booth Man, Cupboard Man, Fireman's Lift Man, and that, distinguished followers, is just the tip of the iceberg. It's time. The Chosen Chimp is proud to introduce another edition of Unit Doing Stuff. Today, fighting normal humans. Round 1. Okay, here we go. It's these guys in a warehouse. Just a bunch of humans. They all look like sort of weird versions of Bob Hoskins. Oh boy. Embarrassing doesn't cover it. This is painful. These people fought Cybermen, for crying out loud. After roughly 3 unit soldiers get offed, the first person to die on the opposing side is the one who throws a box at a light. Brigadier only doesn't die because one of them misses when they try and shoot him. We should be laughing at these guys because they're pretty rubbish, but they're just not as bad as Unit. In the end, Unit do get the upper hand because the boss suddenly surrenders on purpose, because it's part of the plan. Well done, Brigadier. Have an exploding radio to the face. You didn't see that coming either, did you? Round 2. Well, if that's how round 1 went, then woe betide when they have a more elite orderly specialist team of folks to deal with. These crooks are armed with hairdryers and have robot penguin faces. They even have awful written on the side of their choppers, and Unit still lose to them in spectacular fashion. Unit are snail trailing on a big truck flanked by motorbikes, and of course that means ambush time. Now look, if you actually just take proper cover and aim for the men correctly when you shoot them, then at least this one tries to take the initiative by grabbing the helicopter, and there he goes. So I'm guessing none of them can run or even jog, because that's getting away really slow. Over to you, Doc. Round 3. Come on boys, let's win this back. Look at them all piled in Bessie there, the flipping clowns. The crooks hiding behind the Silcock Bakery van actually lose this one, and Unit don't incur heavy losses. And the Brigadier has a right old scrap, yes mate. You punch him down that hill. Go on Unit, you did yourself proud, because we should take these victories as and when they... I love how Ambassadors of Death is presented visually, and I love its sound, but I also love the idea of a villain who becomes the self-fulfilling prophecy of the thing that he feared. It's just really clever. It's the most complex example of a homegrown threat in a universe full of big bads. And there's probably a million squillion examples of how that wasn't done particularly well, but I think Ambassadors of Death is the example where they absolutely knocked it out of the park. I just really like everything about this. I think it's smart, it's often subtle. Doctor is brilliant. The mystery leading towards the conclusion is really exciting and really well measured. And as I've said a number of times in this video, Series 7 was a kind of blank canvas upon which some new ideas could be thrown into the world of Doctor Who. It was becoming a new show, and Ambassadors of Death kind of championed that, for better or for worse. I don't think there was ever a Doctor Who story, especially not in the Jon Pertwee world, that some of the themes were covered again, some of the locations and some of the characters recur, but the way it's packaged, I just love the character and the individualness of Ambassadors for Death, the Ambassadors of Death. I like it so much, I can't get its name right. Like I said already, please do get yourself to the comment section and tell me how you would rank Classic Series 7. And I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then you might want to check out my video all about Inferno. Until then, what other Doctor Who stuff would you like me to talk about? Sound off, and don't forget to hit subscribe. Have a good one.